Some nights, loneliness feels like a cold that seeps into your very bones, no matter how bright the fire burns. Elena knew this feeling well as she sat in her cottage, surrounded by dried herbs and memories of a family long gone. The 57-year-old widow lived alone at the edge of a dark forest, spending her days healing others, while her own heart remained broken. On this bitter winter night, a dying stranger collapsed at her door. Against all sense, she brought him inside. The man was pale as fresh snow, with eyes that seemed older than time itself. He spoke in whispers of forgotten days and distant lands. Elena had no idea she had just saved the life of the world's first vampire. What happens when two lonely souls meet on the longest night of winter? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stranger lay unconscious on Elena's the wooden table, his breathing so shallow she had to lean close to feel the faint whisper against her cheek. Snow continued to fall beyond her windows, each flake catching the amber glow of her oil lamps like tiny stars descending from a black sky. She had dragged him inside with strength she didn't know she still possessed, her muscles protesting after years of tending only herbs and small wounds. Elena Marchetti had been the village healer for more than 3 decades, ever since her grandmother passed the knowledge to her, along with this stone cottage that sat like a guardian at the forest's edge. The villagers of Valdris trusted her completely. Mothers brought feverish children in the dead of night, farmers arrived with wounds from sharp tools, and young wives sought her counsel for ailments they dared not speak of elsewhere. She was their keeper of remedies, their bridge between the known world and the mysteries that herbs could unlock. The cottage itself told the story of generations of healers. Bundles of dried lavender, thyme, and chamomile hung from every beam, filling the air with an earthy sweetness that spoke of comfort and healing. Clay pots lined wooden shelves, each carefully labeled in her grandmother's spidery handwriting. For the restless sleep, when bones ache with weather, to mend a broken heart. Elena had added her own labels over the years, her neat script a testament to knowledge earned through decades of caring for others. Her workbench dominated one corner of the main room, its surface stained with the juices of countless roots and leaves. A mortar and pestle sat ready, worn smooth by generations of grinding. Glass vials caught the lamplight like captured rainbows, each containing tinctures that could ease pain, reduce fever, or bring peaceful dreams to the troubled. This was Elena's world, a place where suffering could be eased, where the body's wisdom could be coaxed back to balance. But tonight, as she studied the pale stranger, Elena felt helpless in a way she hadn't experienced since. She touched the silver locket at her throat, feeling the familiar weight of the pressed flower hidden within. 23 years had passed since the plague swept through Valdris like death's own angel, taking her husband Marco and their 2 children in the span of a single, terrible week. She had been younger then, barely 34, with healing knowledge that felt like armor against the world's cruelties. The plague had taught her otherwise. Marco had been a blacksmith, with hands gentle enough to braid their daughter's hair and strong enough to shape iron to his will. Little Sophia had inherited her father's dark eyes and her mother's curiosity about the healing arts. 8-year-old Paolo had shown promise with letters and numbers, his quick mind already grasping concepts that would have served him well as a scholar. They were gone now, all of them, buried in the cemetery behind the village church where wildflowers grew over their graves each spring. The stranger stirred, pulling Elena back to the present. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost luminescent in the firelight, and cold to the touch, despite the warmth radiating from her hearth. She had removed his travel-stained cloak, a beautiful thing made of fabric that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, and found beneath it the clothes of a nobleman, though worn and weathered by long journeying. Elena had seen many travelers over the years, Valdris sat at the crossroads between the mountain passes and the lowlands, making it a natural stopping place for merchants, pilgrims, and those seeking new fortunes in distant lands. Most arrivals were predictable. Dust-covered traders with weather-beaten faces, young men seeking adventure with coins jingling in their purses, occasionally a family moving to start fresh somewhere new. This man was different. Even unconscious, he carried himself with an otherworldly grace. His features were sharp and aristocratic, as if carved by a master sculptor who understood both beauty and sorrow. His hair, dark as a moonless night, fell across his forehead in a way that made him appear younger than the lines around his eyes suggested. Those eyes, when they had briefly opened as she dragged him inside, had held depths that seemed to echo with the weight of years, far more years than any mortal should carry. The village of Valdris itself was a place where time moved slowly, where generations of families had worked the same land, practiced the same trades, and told the same stories around winter fires. Elena's cottage marked the boundary between the safe, known world of cultivated fields and careful gardens, and the wild forest that stretched beyond like a dark ocean. Few villagers ventured into those woods after sunset, and fewer still would dare approach Elena's cottage during the hours when shadows grew long and whispers seemed to drift on the wind. Old stories lived in Valdris, the way ivy clung to ancient walls, persistent, intricate, impossible to fully remove. Elena's grandmother had been a keeper of such stories, along with her herbs and healing knowledge. Tales of travelers who arrived in winter and vanished come spring, leaving behind only mysterious gifts and the lingering sense that something extraordinary had passed through their midst. Stories of creatures that walked between the human world and realms unknown, wearing familiar faces while harboring ancient secrets. Elena had always dismissed such tales as the products of long winters and too much ale consumed around the tavern's fire. She dealt in practical matters, which herbs could ease a child's cough, how to set a broken bone, what combinations of roots and flowers could ease an old woman's arthritis. Magic was for stories. Healing was for the real world. Yet as she prepared a bowl of warm broth and gathered clean cloths to tend the stranger's wounds, Elena couldn't shake. The feeling that the stories and the real world were about to collide in her humble cottage. The man's presence felt significant in a way she couldn't name, as if his arrival marked the beginning of something that would change everything. The wind picked up outside, howling through the bare branches of the ancient oak that stood sentinel beside her cottage. Elena had always found comfort in that sound, the voice of the wild world, reminding her that life continued beyond human plans and purposes. Tonight, however, the wind sounded different. Tonight, it carried an edge of warning, a suggestion that winter had brought more than snow to Valdris. She knelt beside the stranger, placing a gentle hand on his forehead to check for fever. His skin was cool, too cool, but his breathing had deepened slightly. Good signs, she told herself, though something in her healer's instincts whispered otherwise. In 30 years of tending the sick and injured, she had never encountered anyone quite like this man. Elena rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered village below. A few windows still glowed with lamplight, but most families had banked their fires and retired to warm beds. The church bell tower stood dark against the sky, its bronze bell silent, until morning prayers would call the faithful to another day of familiar routines. She thought of Father Benedict, the village priest whose sermons often touched on the importance of Christian charity and the duty to welcome strangers. Surely he would approve of her decision to offer shelter to a man in need. Yet something held her back from sending word to the priest or to Dr. Meridian, the village physician who might be better equipped to tend serious injuries. The stranger was her responsibility now. She had made that choice the moment she opened her door to the storm and saw him collapsed in the snow. Elena had learned long ago that some decisions, once made, carried the weight of destiny. This felt like one. Of those moments a crossroads where the path chosen would determine everything that followed. She returned to his side and carefully began cleaning the minor cuts and scrapes that marked his journey. His hands, she noticed, were unmarked by the calluses that spoke of honest labor. These were the hands of a scholar or a nobleman, smooth and elegant despite their strength. When she lifted one to examine a scratch along his knuckles, she was struck by how perfectly still he lay, no restless shifting, no sleep murmurs that usually accompanied fever or exhaustion. Elena pulled her grandmother's quilt up to his chin and settled into the wooden chair beside the table to keep watch. The night was far from over, and she sensed that morning would bring questions she wasn't prepared to answer. For now, she simply sat in the lamplight, listening to the storm rage outside, while the mysterious stranger slept the sleep of the truly weary. The silver locket at her throat caught the firelight as she breathed, its weight a familiar comfort. Inside lay a pressed flower from her wedding bouquet, a violet that had somehow retained its color despite the passing years. It served as a reminder that love, once given truly, could survive even death's separation. Perhaps that was why she had opened her door tonight, because loneliness recognized loneliness, and mercy was sometimes the only gift one broken soul could offer another. As the hours passed and the stranger slept on, Elena found herself wondering what sorrows had driven him to her doorstep. In the morning, she would learn his name and his story. Tonight, she simply offered the ancient hospitality of shelter from the storm, unaware that she had just changed the course of her quiet life forever. Dawn arrived pale and hesitant, filtered through clouds heavy with unspent snow. Elena had dozed fitfully in her chair, waking each time the wind rattled her windows or the fire crackled too loudly. The stranger had not stirred once. During the long night, his breathing so quiet she had checked twice to ensure he still lived. Now, as weak sunlight struggled through the frost-covered glass, she saw his eyes were open. They were the color of storm clouds, grey-blue and fathomless, studying her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. Not the unfocused gaze of someone emerging from unconsciousness, but the alert awareness of a predator taking measure of its surroundings. Elena straightened in her chair, suddenly conscious of how vulnerable she appeared, a woman alone with a stranger whose strength she could not judge. "Good morning," she said softly, keeping her voice gentle despite the unease creeping up her spine. "I am Elena. You collapsed at my door last night." The man sat up with fluid grace, no sign of the stiffness that should have accompanied a night spent unconscious on a hard table. His movements held an otherworldly elegance, as if gravity affected him differently than normal men. The travel-stained clothes could not diminish the aristocratic bearing that seemed bred into his very bones. "Varric," he said, his voice carrying an accent she could not place, something old and refined, as if he had learned his speech in courts that no longer existed. "I am called Varric Draculesti. You have my gratitude for your kindness, though I fear it may prove costly." Elena rose and moved to her workbench, hands busy with familiar tasks to calm her nerves. "Everyone deserves shelter from a storm. Are you hungry? I have bread and cheese, perhaps some tea to warm you." "I require no food," Varric replied, swinging his legs over the side of the table, "though I would be grateful for your continued hospitality until the snow clears." Something in his refusal struck Elena as odd. In her experience, travelers were always hungry, always grateful for a warm meal after hard journeying. She glanced back at him and noticed he had positioned himself carefully away from the window where morning light might touch him directly. "You mentioned cost," she said, returning to her chair but maintaining more distance than before. "What did you mean?" Varric's laugh held no humor, only a bitter edge that spoke of long familiarity with regret. "I bring danger wherever I go, Lady Elena. It follows in my wake like carrion birds, patient and hungry. Those who shelter me often find their kindness repaid with sorrow." "What kind of danger?" Elena's healer instincts warred with caution. This man needed help. She could see it in the careful way he held himself, the shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of exhaustion deeper than mere travel weariness, yet every fibre of her being whispered warnings. Instead of answering directly, Varric moved to examine the bundles of herbs hanging from her rafters. His knowledge surprised her. He identified chamomile, valerian, and wolfsbane with the confidence of someone well versed in their properties. When his fingers brushed the silvery leaves of a rare mountain herb, he named it in a language she had never heard. "Where did you learn of healing plants?" Elena asked. "I have had many years to study the mysteries of life and death," Varric replied, his back still turned. "Your grandmother was wise to grow wolfsbane. It has protective qualities beyond its use in medicines." Elena's blood chilled. She had never told him about her grandmother, and the wolfsbane grew wild at the forest's edge. Few people would recognize it, hanging among her more common herbs. "How do you know of my grandmother?" Varric turned, and in the morning light she saw his face clearly for the first time. The aristocratic features she had noted were sharper than she remembered, almost predatory. His skin held a translucent quality, as if lit from within by cold fire. Most disturbing were his eyes, ancient eyes that seemed to hold memories of centuries, not decades. "Forgive me. I speak carelessly when I am weary." His smile revealed teeth that seemed too sharp, though the expression softened his harsh features. "I meant only that any healer wise enough to grow such a complete collection would naturally include protective herbs." Elena nodded, though unease continued to coil in her stomach. She moved to stoke the fire, needing the familiar comfort of routine. As she knelt before the hearth, she became aware that Varric cast no reflection in the polished brass surface of her fire screen. Her hand froze on the poker. Slowly, carefully, she angled the brass to confirm what she had seen. Varric stood directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his body, yet the reflective surface showed only her own startled face. "You see it now," Varric said quietly. "I wondered when you would notice." Elena rose and turned to face him, the fire poker still gripped in her white-knuckled hands. "What are you?" "Something that should not exist," he replied with devastating honesty. "Something that has forgotten how to die." "The missing travelers," Elena whispered, remembering the whispered conversations in the village market. 3 merchants in the past month vanished without trace on the mountain roads. Varric's expression grew pained. "I do not prey upon travelers, Lady Elena, though others of my kind are less discriminating. Those deaths were not my doing, but they herald the approach of those who serve darker appetites than mine." "Others of your kind?" Elena's voice was barely audible. "You speak of vampires." The word hung between them like a blade. Varric neither confirmed nor denied it, but his stillness, the complete absence of breath, heartbeat, or any sign of life, spoke loudly enough. Elena's mind raced through fragments of old stories, half-remembered warnings passed down through generations of healers. Her grandmother's voice echoed in memory. "The old knowledge exists for a reason, child. Evil takes many forms, but it always hungers." "Why did you come here?" she asked. "Because I am dying," Varric said simply. "Not the quick death of mortals, but the slow dissolution of something that has outlived its purpose. I seek an end to this existence, Lady Elena. I have wandered for centuries looking for peace, and your village holds something I need." Elena backed toward the wall, where her grandmother's wooden cross hung, a simple thing carved from mountain ash, blessed by Father Benedict himself. Varric's eyes followed her movement, and she saw him flinch slightly as her fingers closed around the holy symbol. "You flinch from the cross," she observed. "It causes discomfort, nothing more. I am not the monster of children's tales, lady. True faith can wound me, but it cannot destroy me easily." He gestured to his travel cloak, now draped over a chair. In daylight, she could see symbols woven into the fabric protective wards from a dozen different traditions. "I have learned to shield myself from the worst effects of sacred things." Elena clutched the gun, crossed tighter, drawing strength from its familiar weight. "What do you want from Valdris?" "There is a weapon here," Varric said. "Something capable of granting true death to creatures like myself. Your grandmother's grandmother knew of it, though the knowledge has likely been forgotten. I have spent decades searching for it." "A weapon?" Elena's voice cracked slightly. "I know nothing of weapons. I am a healer." "Your family has been more than healers, though that knowledge was deliberately obscured." Varric's grey eyes held infinite sadness. "They were guardians, keepers of ancient protections against the darkness that sometimes walks among humanity." Elena's legs felt suddenly weak. She sank into her chair, still gripping the cross. "Even if such a thing existed, why would you seek your own destruction?" "Because I am tired, Lady Elena." Varric moved to the window, careful to remain in shadow. "Imagine living long enough to watch every person you have ever loved crumble to dust. Imagine carrying the weight of countless mistakes, countless moments of weakness that can never be undone. Imagine being forever hungry for something that causes pain to obtain." His words carried such profound weariness that Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Despite her fear, despite the evidence of her senses, she found herself moved by his obvious suffering. "The missing travelers were killed by my progeny," Varric interrupted. "Vampires I created long ago, in moments of loneliness and poor judgment. They have followed my trail here, drawn by blood and old loyalties. They will arrive soon, and when they do, this village will become a hunting ground." Elena stood, decision crystallizing in her mind with startling clarity. Whatever Varric was, whatever he had done, he had spoken truthfully about the danger. She could see it in the way he positioned himself to watch the roads, in the tension that never left his supernatural frame. "Then we must find this weapon you seek," she said quietly, "before your progeny arrive." Varric turned sharply, surprise flickering across his ancient features. "You would help me, even knowing what I am?" Elena looked at the cross in her hands, thinking of her grandmother's teachings about mercy being the highest form of courage. "You came seeking death, not life. That makes you different from any monster I might fear." For the first time since awakening, Varric smiled with something approaching warmth. "You are either very wise or very foolish, Lady Elena." "Perhaps both," she replied, though her voice remained steady. "Now tell me everything you know about this weapon, and pray we find it before the true monsters arrive." The village records lay spread across Elena's kitchen table like fallen leaves, their yellowed pages crackling with age as she turned them carefully. Father Benedict had been surprisingly accommodating when she'd requested access to the church archives, citing her need to research herbal remedies. Mentioned in old texts, the priest had no reason to suspect her true purpose, searching for any mention of supernatural visitors or mysterious weapons hidden in Valdris. Varric sat across from her, maintaining careful distance from the window, where afternoon sunlight streamed through frost-etched glass. He moved with predatory grace, even in stillness, every gesture economical and precise. Elena found herself stealing glances at him, noting details that marked him as something other than human, the way his chest never rose with breath, how his fingers remained steady without the minute tremors that affected all living beings. "Here," she said, pointing to an entry dated nearly 2 centuries past. "Listen to this. Stranger arrived in winter storm, spoke of distant kingdoms in tongues unknown. Brother Marcus reports guest required no sustenance, cast no shadow at matins. Departed before spring thaw, left silver coins of unknown mintage." Varric leaned forward, careful not to let the sunlight touch him. "The silver coins, do you know what became of them?" Elena turned several pages, scanning faded entries. "Father Gregory melted them down for the altar chalice. He wrote that the silver was purer than any he had encountered, with markings that seemed to shift in candlelight." She paused, studying Varric's sharp profile. "Was that visitor you?" "No, though perhaps one of my kind." Varek's voice carried centuries of weariness. We have walked among humanity far longer than most realize. The truly old ones learned discretion early, taking what we needed while leaving as few traces as possible. Elena continued reading, her healer's training serving her well in deciphering archaic script. The records painted a picture of Valdris as more than a simple farming village. It had served as a way station for unusual travelers throughout its history. Entries spoke of pilgrims bearing strange relics, merchants whose goods seemed touched by otherworldly craftsmanship, and visitors who arrived seeking the blessing of the guardians. Guardians, Elena murmured. That word appears repeatedly. Always capitalized, always mentioned with reverence. Your bloodline, Varek said quietly. The women of your family have served as protectors for generations. Though the knowledge was deliberately obscured to keep you safe, Elena's fingers traced an entry from her great-grandmother's time. Young Maria Benedetti shows promise with the old knowledge. Mother Superior counsels caution the shadows gather, and the guardians must remain hidden until the time of choosing. Maria Benedetti was my great-grandmother, Elena whispered. But she died young in childbirth. My grandmother never spoke of her except in prayers. The burden often passes to the next in line when death comes too soon. Varek's grey eyes held profound sadness. Your grandmother protected you by keeping you ignorant, but protection and preparation are different things. Elena turned to Azir's teen section of records that predated any others, written in Latin that taxed her limited education. She could make out references to blessed weapons and the silver that sleeps until awakened, but the meaning remained frustratingly unclear. Can you read this? She asked, sliding the ancient volume toward Varek. He studied the text, his expression growing more serious with each line. It speaks of 3 sacred implements hidden within Valdris during the early days of the church. A dagger blessed by a saint, a chalice that could contain holy power, and a mirror that showed truth beyond the veil of flesh. And these weapons could grant true death to the undead, Varek finished, but only if wielded by one of guardian blood with the proper knowledge. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air seeping through her cottage walls. I don't have that knowledge. I'm a simple healer who grows herbs and tends wounds. You carry the blood. The knowledge sleeps within you, passed down through generations, even when the conscious understanding was lost. Varek closed the record book carefully. But awakening, it will not be without cost. As if summoned by their conversation, a sharp rap sounded at Elena's door. She froze, recognizing the authoritative knock of Dr. Meridian, the village physician. Varek was on his feet instantly, moving with inhuman speed to position himself behind the heavy wooden beam that supported her roof. Elena? Dr. Meridian's voice carried concern. I heard you were tending a patient. As the village physician, I should examine anyone who might pose a health risk to the community. Elena's mind raced. Dr. Meridian was a good man, conscientious about his duties and genuinely caring toward his patients. But he was also observant and methodical traits that would make Varek's supernatural nature difficult to conceal. One moment, Doctor, Elena called, gathering the scattered records and stuffing them into a leather satchel. She gestured frantically for Varek to retreat to her small sleeping alcove behind the main room. Varek shook his head and pointed upward. Before Elena could object, he moved to the wooden ladder that led to her tiny loft space above the rafters, ascending with silent grace. The ancient timbers didn't creak under his weight, another unsettling reminder of his otherworldly nature. Elena opened the door to find Dr. Meridian stamping snow from his boots, his medical bag clutched in one gloved hand. He was a man of middle years with kind eyes and greying whiskers, respected throughout Valdris for his skill and dedication. Doctor, what brings you out in this weather? Elena asked, stepping aside to let him enter. Father Benedict mentioned you'd requested the church records for medical research. Doctor. Meridian set his bag on her workbench and looked around the cottage with professional interest. He also said you'd taken in a traveler last night. I wanted to ensure the man wasn't carrying disease. Elena's mouth went dry. He's resting now. Nothing contagious, merely exhaustion from the storm. Nevertheless, I should examine him. We can't be too careful, especially with winter limiting our supply of medicines. Dr. Meridian moved toward the sleeping alcove. He's not there, Elena said quickly. He stepped out to tend his horse in my stable. Dr. Meridian paused, confusion creasing his features. In this weather? And I saw no tracks leading to your stable. The snow lies undisturbed. Elena cursed silently. She had forgotten that Varric would leave no footprints, another supernatural trait that marked him as something beyond mortal understanding. Perhaps the wind filled them in, she suggested weakly. Dr. Meridian's expression grew concerned, but his worry seemed focused on her rather than any mysterious patient. Elena, are you feeling well? You seem agitated, and there's something about your demeanor that suggests fever or exhaustion. The irony struck her. Here was a man trained to diagnose illness, applying his skills to her while a creature of legend hid mere feet above their heads. If Dr. Meridian knew the truth about her current situation, he would likely prescribe bed rest and strong tonics for what he would assume were delusions. I had little sleep last night, Elena said, which was perfectly true. Tending a patient in distress always leaves me drained. Doctor. Meridian nodded sympathetically and moved to examine her herb stores, a habit of his whenever he visited. Elena watched nervously as he studied her collection, hoping he wouldn't notice anything unusual. You have wolfsbane, he observed. Curious, I know of no medicinal uses for it that justify the risk of keeping such a poisonous plant. Elena's heart hammered. My grandmother's recipe for a poultice. Very diluted, used externally for joint pain. Dr. Meridian made a note in his small journal. I'd be interested to review that recipe. Always eager to learn new applications for traditional remedies. Above them, Elena heard the faintest creak of timber. Doctor. Meridian glanced upward briefly, but the sound could easily be attributed to the cottage settling in the cold. I should let you rest, Dr. Meridian said finally, gathering his bag. But I would like to examine your patient when he returns. Professional courtesy, you understand. Of course, Elena agreed, though she had no idea how she would manage such a meeting. After Dr. Meridian left, Elena waited several minutes before calling softly. He's gone. Varric descended from the loft with supernatural silence, his expression troubled. Your village physician is more observant than most. We will need to be extremely careful. Elena sank into her chair, the weight of deception heavy on her shoulders. I've never lied to Dr. Meridian before. He's been nothing but kind to me. Kindness and understanding are different things, Varric said gently. Most humans cannot accept what contradicts their view of the world. They would rather destroy the impossible than question their certainties. Elena looked at the leather satchel containing the church records, thinking of the fragments of knowledge they had uncovered. How much time do we have before your progeny arrive? Days, perhaps less. Varric moved to the window, scanning the tree line beyond her cottage. They will follow my scent on the wind, and they travel faster than living things. We must find the weapon soon, or this conversation will become meaningless. Elena nodded, steeling herself for whatever revelations lay ahead. Then we continue searching. But first, tell me more about awakening this guardian knowledge you speak of. If it's truly within me, I need to understand how to access it. Varric turned from the window, his ancient eyes holding both hope and resignation. The awakening requires blood, pain, and absolute trust. Are you prepared for such a trial? Elena thought of her quiet life, her simple routines, the comfortable certainties that had defined her existence since Marco's death. All of it felt suddenly fragile, like morning frost that would vanish at the first touch of true heat. Ask me again tomorrow, she said quietly, when we know more about what we face. The vial of holy water caught the lamplight like captured starshine, its crystal surface unmarred by the trembling of Elena's hands. She had retrieved it from the small shrine in her sleeping alcove, a relic blessed by Father Benedict during the Easter Vigil, intended for protection against evil influences. Now it would serve as a test of everything she had begun to believe about the man who called himself Varek. "You need not do this," Varek said quietly from his position near the cold hearth. Night had fallen again, bringing with it a sense of safety from prying eyes, but also an awareness that darkness was his natural element. "You have already seen enough to know my nature, Elena. Unstop the vial, the blessed water releasing a faint fragrance of roses and myrrh. Seeing and understanding are different things. If I am to help you find this weapon, I must know the full extent of what you are." She had spent the afternoon in contemplation, weighing the evidence of her senses against a lifetime of rational thought. The missing reflection, the lack of breath, the supernatural grace, all pointed to conclusions that her mind struggled to accept. Yet her heart, schooled by years of caring for others, recognized the genuine suffering in Varek's ancient eyes. "Very well." Varek moved closer, stopping just beyond arm's reach. "But know that even blessed water cannot destroy me completely. I am far older than the common vampires of legend, shaped by different forces and bound by different laws." Elena lifted the vial, her hand steadier now that decision had been made. "Tell me what to expect." "Pain," Varek said simply. "But not death, not from this. I have endured the touch of consecrated silver, walked on ground blessed by saints, even entered churches when desperate need demanded it. True faith wounds me, but mortal faith blessed by mortal hands cannot unmake what I have become." Elena tipped the vial, allowing 3 drops of holy water to fall onto Varek's outstretched palm. The effect was immediate and terrible. Steam rose from his skin as if the water were molten metal, and he hissed through teeth clenched against obvious agony. The flesh where the drops had fallen turned bright red, then began to blacken at the edges. But he did not flee. He did not scream or curse or transform into the monstrous shape that children's stories described. Instead, he stood perfectly still, allowing the pain to wash through him while his grey eyes never left Elena's face. "Enough," Elena whispered, horror and compassion warring in her chest. She reached for a clean cloth to wipe away the remaining water, but Varek shook his head. "Let it finish," he said through gritted teeth. "You need to see." Elena watched as the blackened flesh gradually began to heal itself, the damaged tissue regenerating with supernatural efficiency. Within moments, only faint marks remained where the holy water had burned, and even those were fading rapidly. "You heal quickly," she observed, her voice carefully neutral. "One of the few benefits of this existence." Varek flexed his fingers, testing the restored skin. "Though the pain lingers longer than the visible damage, sacred things leave scars that go deeper than flesh." Elena replaced the stopper in the vial and set it aside, her hands now trembling with reaction rather than uncertainty. "You said you were different from other vampires. How?" Varek moved to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered village below. "I was not made by another of my kind, as most vampires are created. My transformation was the result of a bargain struck in desperation, a price paid for power I needed to save those I loved." "What kind of bargain?" "The details are not important now," Varek said, though pain flickered across his features. "What matters is that the ritual which changed me also bound me with certain limitations and certain protections. I cannot create others of my kind through the simple act of feeding. I cannot enter homes without invitation. And I cannot find peace in death through conventional means." Elena absorbed this information, her healer's mind cataloguing the implications. "The weapon you seek, it would overcome these protections. The sacred implements hidden in your village were crafted specifically to deal with creatures like myself. They bypass the supernatural protections that make us difficult to destroy. Varek's reflection was absent from the dark window, creating the unsettling image of Elena's cottage floating in empty night. But they require a guardian's blood to awaken their power. The word guardian sent a chill through Elena's bones. She thought of the church records, the cryptic references to her family's hidden role, the knowledge that had supposedly been passed down through generations of women who had died too young to share their secrets. "Tell me about my grandmother," Elena said. "Did you know her?" Varek turned from the window, surprise flickering in his ancient eyes. "You think I have been in this region before? You knew about the wolfsbane, knew things about my family that you shouldn't have known. Either you've been here before, or you've encountered others like me." "Others like you," Varek confirmed quietly. "Guardian bloodlines exist throughout the world, though they grow rarer with each passing generation. Most die young, victims of the very evil they were born to fight. Others live in ignorance of their heritage, the knowledge lost through tragedy or deliberate concealment." Elena felt a profound sadness settle over her like a familiar cloak. "My grandmother protected me by keeping me ignorant. Can you blame her? She had already lost her daughter, your great-grandmother Maria, to the guardian's burden. When your mother showed no signs of the gift, your grandmother likely hoped the bloodline had finally found peace. But it didn't." Elena touched the silver locket at her throat, thinking of the pressed flower within. "The gift passed to me. It did. And now circumstances have brought us together at the moment when that gift is most desperately needed." Varek's voice carried both gratitude and regret. "I am sorry, Elena. You deserved a life of simple happiness, tending your herbs and healing minor ailments. Instead, you inherit a legacy of blood and sacrifice." Elena rose and moved to her workbench, where bundles of dried herbs hung like memories of summer warmth. Among them, the silvery leaves of wolfsbane seemed to glow with their own inner light, as if responding to the supernatural presence in her cottage. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "but we all inherit legacies. We didn't choose. The question is what we do with them." She turned to face Varek, decision crystallizing in her mind with surprising clarity. "I will help you find these sacred implements. Not because I fully understand what I am, but because I recognize what you are, a soul in pain seeking redemption." Varek's expression transformed, hope replacing the resignation that had marked his features since awakening. "You realize that awakening your guardian abilities may change you permanently? The knowledge once gained cannot be forgotten. The power, once touched, leaves marks on both body and spirit." Elena thought of her quiet life, her comfortable routines, the predictable rhythm of seasons that had defined her existence for nearly 2 decades. All of it felt suddenly small, compared to the vast darkness that Varek described, the ancient evil that his progeny represented. "My life changed the moment I opened my door to you," she said. "Now we must ensure that change serves a greater purpose than simple kindness." Varek moved closer, and Elena caught the scent that clung to him, not death or decay as she might have expected, but something like winter air and old stones, clean and cold and infinitely sad. "There will be blood," he warned. "The awakening ritual requires sacrifice to open the pathways that connect you to your heritage. Are you prepared for such pain?" Elena looked at her hands, the same hands that had tended countless wounds and eased innumerable sufferings. They were strong hands, steady hands, hands that had learned to bring healing even in the face of hopeless odds. "I've been prepared my entire life," she said quietly. "I simply didn't know it until now." Varek smiled then, the first genuine expression of joy she had seen from him. It transformed his harsh features, revealing the man he might have been before darkness claimed him. "Then we begin tonight," he said, "before my progeny arrive and choice is taken from us both." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of destiny settle around her shoulders, like her grandmother's quilt, heavy with history, warm with purpose, and irrevocable as the turning of seasons. The sacred implements of Valdris awaited discovery, and with them, the answers that would determine whether their story ended in redemption or tragedy. The map spread across Elena's table was unlike anything she had ever seen, not drawn on parchment or paper, but etched into a sheet of metal that seemed to shift between silver and copper, depending on the angle of the lamplight. Trade routes wound across its surface like veins, connecting cities whose names she recognized from childhood stories. Constantinople, Jerusalem, Rome, distant capitals that existed now only in memory. "This shows your travels?" Elena asked, tracing one of the pathways with her fingertip. The metal felt warm to the touch, as if it still held echoes of the journeys it recorded. 5 centuries of wandering, Varric confirmed, his voice heavy with the weight of accumulated years. Each line represents a decade or more of searching, always moving, never finding the peace I sought. Elena studied the intricate patterns, noting how some routes crossed and recrossed, creating a web of repeated journeys. You return to the same places many times. Hope dies hard, even in the undead. Varric's finger traced a route that ended in a region Elena recognized as the mountains surrounding Valdris. "I have spent lifetimes seeking rumors of weapons that could grant true death to creatures like myself. Most proved to be children's tales or simple superstition. The map showed far more than mere geography. Tiny symbols marked significant locations, crosses for churches, crescents for mosques, intricate knots that might represent pagan sites. Some symbols pulsed with faint light as Elena watched, as if responding to her proximity. "These lights," she said, pointing to a glowing mark near what appeared to be Canterbury. "What do they signify?" "Places where I encountered others of guardian blood." Varric's expression grew distant. Most were already aware of their heritage, trained from childhood in the old ways. They saw me as an abomination to be destroyed, rather than a soul seeking redemption. Elena felt a pang of sympathy for the loneliness such encounters must have brought. "They tried to kill you?" "They tried. Some came closer than others." Varric touched a scar along his jaw that Elena had assumed was from his recent travels. "A guardian in Prague had a blade blessed by 3 different saints. It took me months to heal from that encounter." "But you didn't fight back? Never to kill?" "I would defend myself only long enough to escape." Varric's grey eyes met hers with profound sadness. How could I blame them for doing what they believed was right? In their place, I might have acted the same. Elena continued studying the map, noting how the routes gradually converged on her region of the mountains. "You've been searching for Valdris specifically?" "For the weapons hidden here, yes." The legends spoke of 3 sacred implements crafted by a saint known for his hatred of the undead. Unlike other blessed weapons, these were designed not just to destroy, but to offer redemption to those who sought it willingly. The concept struck Elena as profoundly important. Redemption rather than simple destruction? The difference between justice and vengeance, Varric explained. Saint Donatus, who created the weapons, understood that not all monsters chose their fate. He believed that true evil lay in the embrace of darkness, not merely in the bearing of it. Elena traced the final route on the map, the one that had brought Varric to her doorstep. "How long have you known about me specifically?" "I didn't. I knew only that guardian blood still flowed in Valdris, though the family had lost the conscious knowledge of their heritage." Varric's voice softened. "I had hoped to find an elderly woman, perhaps, or a young man showing signs of the gift. I never expected a middle-aged widow with no training and no knowledge of any of this," Elena finished wryly. "I expected someone remarkable," Varric corrected gently, "and I was not disappointed." Heat rose in Elena's cheeks at the compliment, an emotion she hadn't experienced since Marco's death. The feeling was both welcome and terrifying welcome, because it reminded her that her heart still lived, terrifying because the man who stirred it was already dead. "Tell me about the loneliness," she said, needing to understand the depth of his isolation. "What is it like to outlive everything you've ever loved?" Varric was quiet for so long that Elena wondered if he would answer. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of centuries. "Imagine watching a garden through countless seasons. You see flowers bloom and fade, trees grow tall and strong before disease claims them, new plantings replacing the old in endless cycles. At first, you try to tend individual plants, caring for them as precious things. But eventually, you realize that your attention only makes their inevitable loss more painful." Elena understood. "So you stopped caring?" "I tried to. But caring is like breathing for those who possess compassion. You can hold your breath for a time, but eventually you must inhale again." Varric's smile was sad and beautiful. "I have loved mortals across the centuries, though I learned to love quietly, from a distance, knowing that my affection was a burden they neither wanted nor deserved." "And the hunger?" Elena asked, voicing the question that had troubled her since learning his nature. "How do you manage it without becoming a monster?" Varric gestured to the silver symbols on the map, their soft glow creating patterns like constellations. "I learned to feed on the dying, those already beyond hope, who welcomed the end I could provide. Soldiers bleeding out on battlefields, plague victims in their final hours, the elderly who had outlived their desire for life. I took only what was freely given, and in return, I eased their passage into whatever comes after." The image was both horrible and touching, a creature cursed with hunger, finding ways to make that curse serve mercy rather than evil. Elena felt her remaining fear of Varric dissolve, replaced by a deep respect for the strength such restraint must have required. "That's why you seek redemption rather than simple destruction," she realized. "You've spent centuries proving you deserve it. Perhaps I simply grew tired of the wait." Varric rolled the map carefully, its metal surface making no sound despite its obvious substance. "Either way, the choice remains before us. Will you attempt to awaken the guardian knowledge within you?" Elena considered the question, though she had already made her decision. The awakening would bring pain and permanent change Varric had made. That clear. But it would also bring the power to help him find peace and protect her village from the approaching threat. "What exactly does the awakening entail?" she asked. "A ritual of blood and sacred fire, performed at the place where your family's power is strongest." Varric's expression grew serious. "It will unlock memories that span generations, flood your mind with knowledge that was never yours to begin with. Some guardians do not survive the experience. Their mortal minds cannot contain the accumulated wisdom of their bloodline." Elena thought of her grandmother, who had lived a long life while keeping the guardian knowledge buried. Had she simply been stronger, or had she paid a different price for her silence? "And if I survive, you will have the knowledge needed to locate and wield the sacred implements. But you will also carry the burden that destroyed so many women of your line, the constant awareness of evil's presence, the compulsion to stand against it, regardless of personal cost." Elena rose and moved to her window, looking out at the sleeping village below. These were her people, the families she had helped bring into the world, the children she had nursed through fevers, the elderly she had comforted in their final days. If Varric's progeny arrived seeking blood, all of them would be at risk. "When do we begin?" she asked. Varric's expression showed both relief and regret. "Tomorrow night, when the moon is dark and the veil between worlds is thinnest. We will need to journey to the old cemetery behind the church that is where your family's power will be strongest." Elena nodded, accepting the weight of destiny that seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. Tomorrow night would bring answers, power, and quite possibly death, but it would also bring the chance to save both a tormented soul and an innocent village. "Then I should rest while I can," she said, turning from the window, "and pray that I prove worthy of the legacy I'm about to claim." Elena's fingers traced the worn leather binding of the book she had never known existed, hidden beneath loose floorboards in the corner where her grandmother's rocking chair had sat for decades. The ornate silver dagger lay beside it, its blade etched with symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering candlelight. Both artifacts had been wrapped in oiled cloth and placed in a cedar box that bore her great-great-grandmother's initials. "She knew," Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "My grandmother knew exactly what I was, what I would become." Varek leaned closer to examine the dagger without touching it, his supernatural senses clearly detecting the sacred power that radiated from the blessed metal. Guardian weapons are passed down through bloodlines, hidden until the need arises. Your grandmother was wise to conceal both the blade and the knowledge. Most guardian children die young when trained too early. Elena opened the leather-bound journal, its pages filled with her grandmother's careful script. The writing began normally enough: recipes for healing tonics, observations about herb cultivation, notes on difficult births she had attended. But as Elena turned the pages, the content shifted dramatically. "The shadows gather again," Elena read aloud. "3 families of guardian blood remain in the mountain territories. The Benedettis hold the blade, the Rossis guard the mirror, the Morettis protect the chalice. When darkness rises, the weapons must unite or all will be lost." Varek's expression grew troubled. 3 weapons, 3 families. Do you know what became of the others?" Elena continued reading, her heart sinking with each revelation. "The Rossi line died out 40 years ago, when Maria Rossi fell from the church tower, though grandmother writes here that she suspects it was no accident. The Morettis left Valdris when I was a child. Their son showed signs of the gift early, and they fled, rather than face the burden, leaving only you." Varek's voice carried both admiration and regret. One guardian, one weapon, against whatever evil approaches. Elena turned more pages, finding detailed drawings of supernatural creatures that made her blood run cold. Vampires, yes, but also things far worse, beings that fed on souls rather than blood, entities that could possess the living, ancient evils that had plagued humanity since the dawn of time. "My grandmother fought these things?" Elena asked, studying a sketch of something with too many teeth and eyes like burning coals. Guardian blood carries the ability to see through supernatural deceptions and wield blessed weapons effectively. But the true power lies in the knowledge, understanding how each type of evil can be defeated, what protections work against which threats. Varek gestured to the journal. "That book contains centuries of accumulated wisdom." Elena found a section devoted entirely to vampires, noting how her grandmother had distinguished between different types. Some were mindless predators, driven only by hunger. Others retained human intelligence, but embraced evil willingly. A third category was marked as seeking redemption, and in the margin her grandmother had written a single word: mercy. She would have helped you, Elena realized, if you had found her instead of me. Perhaps, though I suspect she would have tested me far more severely than you have. Varek's smile was rueful. Trained guardians are notoriously suspicious of vampires who claim noble intentions. Elena continued reading until she found the passage that made her hands tremble. The awakening ritual must be performed at the moment of greatest darkness, when the moon's face is hidden and the boundary between life and death grows thin. The guardian must offer her blood willingly, allowing the accumulated knowledge of her lineage to flow into her consciousness. Warning: the process has claimed the lives of 3 women in our family. Only attempt if the alternative is the fall of all protections. Varek noticed her sudden stillness. What is it? Elena read the passage aloud, her voice barely steady. 3 deaths, Varek. 3 women of my bloodline who didn't survive the awakening. You can still choose differently, Varek said quietly. We could flee Voldris together, leave my progeny to find only an empty village. Your life need not be risked for my redemption." Elena looked up from the journal, seeing the genuine concern in his ancient eyes. This creature who had lived for centuries, who sought only an end to his suffering, was willing to abandon his quest rather than see her endangered. "And what of the villagers? Your progeny won't simply leave when they find you gone. They'll hunt until their hunger is satisfied. Then we warn the village, help them flee before what? Before we abandon them to save ourselves?" Elena closed the journal firmly. "That's not who I am, Varric. And I don't think it's who you are either." She stood and moved to the window, watching the first snow of evening begin to fall. The village below looked peaceful, smoke rising from chimneys as families gathered for dinner. Children were playing in the square despite the cold, their laughter carrying on the crisp air. "I've spent 20 years healing these people," Elena said, "delivering their babies, tending their wounds, easing their suffering. How can I choose my safety over theirs?" "Because you matter too," Varric replied, his voice rough with emotion she hadn't expected. "In 5 centuries of existence, I have met few people with your courage, your compassion. The world would be darker without you in it." Elena felt warmth bloom in her chest, despite the cold radiating from the window. When had she begun to care so deeply for this tormented soul? When had his opinion of her become so precious? "Then help me survive the awakening," she said, turning back to face. "Use your centuries of knowledge to guide me through whatever comes." Varric rose and moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. "I would give anything to spare you this trial." "I know." Elena reached out and touched his hand, noting how her warmth seemed to chase the cold from his supernatural flesh. "But some choices aren't about what we want, they're about what we must do to live with ourselves." Varric's fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness. "You remind me why I chose to seek redemption rather than embrace the darkness. In your presence, I remember what it felt like to be human. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities neither dared voice." Elena was acutely aware of how close he stood, how his otherworldly grace made even simple movements seem like poetry. This was dangerous territory, allowing herself to care for someone who walked between life and death. "The ritual," she said finally, though she didn't pull her hand away. "Tell me exactly what will happen." Varric's thumb traced across her knuckles, and Elena wondered if he could feel the pulse that quickened under his touch. "At midnight, when the dark moon reaches its zenith, we'll go to the old cemetery. There, surrounded by the graves of your ancestors, you'll use the silver dagger to open a vein in your wrist." Elena's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression steady. "And then, the blood will awaken the connection to your bloodline, allowing their knowledge to flow into your consciousness. You'll experience their memories, their training, their accumulated wisdom, all of it flooding your mind at once. How long does it last? Minutes, perhaps an hour. Time moves strangely during the awakening. You may live through decades of your ancestors' experiences in the span of heartbeats." Varric's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "The danger lies in the mind's ability to process so much information simultaneously. Some guardians lose themselves in the flood of memories, unable to distinguish between past and present." Elena absorbed this, calculating risks as she had learned to do through years of treating dangerous fevers and difficult births. "What can you do to help?" "Stay with you throughout the process. Use my voice as an anchor to the present, a reminder of who you are and where you belong." Varric's expression grew fierce with determination. "I swear to you, Elena, I will not let you be lost to the darkness, even if it means abandoning my own quest for peace." Elena felt tears prick her eyes at the simple sincerity of his vow. "And if I survive, if the awakening succeeds, then you'll have the knowledge needed to locate and wield the other sacred implements. Together, the 3 weapons possess the power to either destroy me completely or transform my curse into something resembling redemption. Elena studied the silver dagger, its blade reflecting the candlelight like captured starfire. Tomorrow night, she would take it to the cemetery and use it to open doorways in her mind that had been sealed for generations. She might emerge with the power to save both Varek and her village, or she might join the 3 women of her bloodline who had died attempting the same ritual. "I should prepare," she said, though she made no move to release Varek's hand. "Elena," his voice was soft, almost hesitant, "whatever happens tomorrow night, I want you to know meeting you has been the greatest gift of my very long existence." Elena looked into his storm-grey eyes and saw 5 centuries of loneliness, but also hope that burned as bright as her candle flames. "And you," she whispered, "have reminded me that my heart is still capable of more than memory." The blood-red ruby amulet caught the candlelight like a captured heart, pulsing with inner fire as Varek lifted it from beneath his shirt. Elena had wondered about the chain he wore, visible only as a thin line of silver against his pale throat, but she had never imagined it held something so beautiful and terrible. "This," Varek said quietly, "is what remains of my humanity." Elena leaned closer, studying the ornate setting that held the gem. The metalwork was unlike anything she had seen, ancient symbols intertwined with delicate filigree that seemed to move in her peripheral vision. "How long have you worn it?" "Since the night I became what I am, 537 years ago, when I made the bargain that saved my people and damned my soul." Varek's fingers closed around the amulet, and Elena noticed how the candle flames dimmed in response. "This holds the last drop of blood from my mortal heart, blood that was freely given in sacrifice." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter wind rattling her windows. "You haven't told me the full truth about your transformation, because the truth makes me a monster in ways that simple vampirism does not." Varek released the amulet, letting it rest against his chest, where the absence of a heartbeat made its presence all the more poignant. "I was not an innocent victim, Elena. I chose this fate willingly, knowing the price." The cottage felt suddenly smaller, the shadows deeper despite the blazing fire. Elena remained in her chair, hands folded in her lap, waiting for him to continue. Whatever revelation was coming, she sensed it would change everything between them. "I was Prince Varek of the Draculesti, heir to a kingdom that no longer appears on any map. The Ottoman armies had swept through our lands like a plague, leaving death and devastation in their wake. My people were starving, my soldiers dying, my castle walls crumbling under siege that had lasted 3 brutal years." Elena tried to imagine the young man he had been, noble, desperate, watching his world burn around him while enemy forces slowly strangled the life from everything he loved. In the darkest hour, when surrender seemed the only alternative to watching my people slowly die of starvation, an ancient being came to me. She offered power enough to break the siege, strength to drive back armies, the ability to save everyone I held dear. Varek's voice carried the weight of centuries-old regret. All I had to do was accept her kiss and become something no longer entirely human. "And you accepted?" "Without hesitation. I was young, arrogant, convinced that I could bear any burden if it meant saving innocent lives." Varek moved to the window, his reflection absent from the glass as he stared out at the snow-covered cemetery where tomorrow night's ritual would take place. The transformation was agonizing, every bone breaking and reforming, every drop of blood in my veins replaced with something colder and far more potent. But when it was finished, I possessed strength that could shatter stone and speed that made me nearly invisible to mortal eyes. Elena found herself holding her breath, caught up in the tragedy of his tale, despite the horror of its implications. "I broke the siege in a single night. 30,000 enemy soldiers fled in terror from a creature they could neither wound nor understand. My people were saved, my kingdom preserved, my name praised throughout the land. Varek's laugh was bitter as winter wind. I was a hero for exactly 3 days. What changed? The hunger began. At first, it was manageable, a nagging emptiness that I could ignore through will alone. But as nights passed, it grew stronger, more demanding. The ancient being who had transformed me returned to explain what I had become and what I would need to survive. Elena's stomach clenched as understanding dawned. You had to feed on human blood, more than that. To maintain the supernatural strength that had saved my kingdom, I would need to create others like myself, a network of vampiric servants who could help me rule and protect the land. Each transformation required the death of the person being changed, followed by their rebirth as something no longer entirely human. The full horror of his situation became clear to Elena. To remain the powerful protector his people needed, Varek would have to systematically destroy their humanity. You refused. I tried to find alternatives. I experimented with animal blood, with feeding only on criminals condemned to die anyway, with rationing my supernatural abilities to reduce the hunger. None of it worked. Varek's voice broke slightly. Within a month, my strength began to fail. Within 2 months, enemy armies were massing at our borders again, sensing weakness. My people looked to their vampire prince for protection, never realizing that their salvation was slowly starving himself to death. Elena rose and moved to stand beside him at the window, close enough to offer comfort without touching. What did you do? I made a choice that haunts me still. Rather than watch my kingdom fall or transform innocent people into monsters, I created my first progeny from volunteers soldiers who were dying from battle wounds, who chose transformation over death in service to their prince. Varek's reflection was absent, but Elena could see his pain in the set of his shoulders, the tension in his supernatural stillness. It worked. I remained strong enough to protect the kingdom, and my new vampiric soldiers were formidable guardians. But the hunger grew worse. It always grows worse. Within a year, I had transformed 12 dying warriors. Within 5 years, that number had tripled. Each new vampire created required blood to survive, and soon we were taking more from the kingdom than we protected. Varek turned from the window, his ancient eyes bright with unshed tears that would never fall. I realized that I had not saved my people, I had simply found a more subtle way to destroy them. Elena felt her heart break for the impossible choice he had faced. So you left. I abandoned everything, my kingdom, my people, my vampiric progeny, all of it. I fled into the wilderness, hoping that distance would somehow break the curse, or at least spare others from paying the price of my salvation. Varek's hand rose to touch the ruby amulet again. But vampires I had created followed me, drawn by blood bonds I didn't understand. Some sought to convince me to return and reclaim my throne. Others simply wanted their maker's blood to increase their own power. Elena understood now why he sought redemption rather than simple destruction. You've spent 5 centuries trying to undo what you did to save your people. I've spent 5 centuries learning that some choices cannot be unmade, only atoned for. The vampires I created still walk the earth, still feed on innocence, still spread the curse I brought into being. Every death they cause is a life I failed to save. Varek pulled the amulet from beneath his shirt, letting it rest in his palm where its ruby surface caught and held the candlelight. This contains the blood I shed willingly on the night of my transformation, the last pure drop of my mortal essence. Legend says it holds the key to breaking the curse, but only through willing sacrifice. Elena stared at the amulet, beginning to understand its true significance. Willing sacrifice by whom? By someone of guardian blood, who chooses freely to take the curse upon herself, allowing my vampiric essence to be purified through her sacrifice. Varek's voice was barely a whisper. It would grant me mortal death, while transforming the sacrificer into something between human and vampire, powerful enough to hunt down and destroy the progeny I created, but cursed to live a life of supernatural loneliness. Elena felt the world tilt around her as the full scope of Varek's request became clear. He had not come seeking a weapon to destroy him. He had come seeking someone willing to die in his place while taking on the burden of hunting his scattered progeny. You want me to sacrifice myself to free you? No, Varek said fiercely, closing his fist around the amulet. I wanted to find the sacred implements your village was said to possess, weapons that could grant redemption without requiring such a terrible price. But if those weapons don't exist, or if we cannot locate them before my progeny arrive, then I become your replacement. Elena's voice was steady, though her mind reeled with the implications. A guardian vampire, charged with destroying every creature you ever created. It is not a choice I would ask of you. It is barely a choice I would allow, even to purchase my own redemption. Varek's grey eyes burned with desperate intensity. There must be another way, Elena. There must be. Elena looked at the ruby amulet, its surface seeming to swirl with inner life. Somewhere within that small gem lay the power to free Varek from centuries of suffering and to bind her to centuries of the same. How many? She asked quietly. How many what? How? Many vampires did you create? How many would I need to destroy? Varek was silent for a long moment. 47 that I know survived the intervening centuries. Perhaps more who have hidden themselves well. Elena absorbed this, calculating the magnitude of the task. A lifetime, several lifetimes of hunting supernatural predators across the world, always alone, always driven by the same hunger that had tormented Varek. And if I refused, if we found another way, or failed entirely, then I remain as I am, until the sacred implements can be found and properly wielded. But my progeny will sense my presence here soon. They are drawn to me by bonds I cannot break. When they arrive, this village will become a hunting ground. Varek's expression grew haunted. I have seen what they do to isolated communities. No one survives, and those who are transformed join their ranks willingly or otherwise. Elena moved to her workbench where her grandmother's journal lay open beside the time. Silver dagger. The weight of destiny pressed down on her shoulders like a mantle of lead. Tomorrow night's awakening ritual had suddenly become far more significant than simply gaining guardian knowledge. It might be her last act as a fully human woman. The other sacred implements, she said, the mirror and chalice your research mentioned, could they change this equation? Perhaps. Legend speaks of the three weapons being able to purify vampiric curses without requiring replacement sacrifices. But they would need to be wielded together by someone with both guardian blood and complete knowledge of the ancient rituals. Knowledge I'll gain tomorrow night, assuming I survive the awakening. Assuming you survive. Varek's voice was rough with emotion. Elena, if the choice comes down to your life or mine, it won't. Elena interrupted firmly. We're going to find another way. We're going to locate the other sacred implements, perform whatever rituals are necessary, and save both your soul and mine. Varek stared at her for a long moment, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. You still choose to help me, even knowing the full price that might be required? Elena looked out at her sleeping village, thinking of all the lives that hung in the balance. I choose to try, Varek. Sometimes that's all any of us can do. Dawn brought with it the sound of horses approaching through the snow, their hooves muffled but urgent. Elena peered through her frost-covered window to see Father Benedict riding hard from the village centre, his black robes whipping behind him like the wings of some great bird. Behind him rode Dr. Meridian and two of the village elders, their faces grim with purpose. They know, Varek said from the shadows where he had spent the daylight hours. Somehow, they know something is wrong. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the riders approach her cottage. On the table before her lay the bundle of protective herbs. She had spent the morning preparing wolfsbane, mountain ash, blessed thistle, and a dozen other plants her grandmother's journal had identified as potent against supernatural evil. Each bundle was carefully wrapped with threads that had been soaked in holy water and bound with silver wire. The riders reached her door, and Father Benedict's authoritative knock echoed through the cottage. Elena glanced at Varric, who had positioned himself behind the heavy wooden beam again, then opened the door with what she hoped was appropriate surprise. "Father Benedict, gentlemen, what brings you out in such weather?" The priest's weathered face was grave, his usually kind eyes sharp with concern. "Elena, we need to speak with you about the stranger you've been harboring. There have been incidents." Elena's stomach clenched. "What kind of incidents?" "Doctor." Meridian stepped forward, his medical bag clutched tightly in one hand. "3 more travelers found dead on the mountain roads this morning, drained of blood, their bodies bearing marks unlike anything I've seen in 30 years of practice." "Bite marks," added Giorgio Fontana, the village blacksmith and eldest of the council, "on the throat and wrists. The kind that belong in children's nightmares, not in the waking world." Elena forced herself to remain calm, though her mind raced. The progeny had arrived sooner than expected, and they were already hunting. Surely bandits could have— "No bandits did this," Father Benedict interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of absolute conviction. "I have seen evil's handiwork before, child. These deaths bear the mark of creatures that should not walk among the living." The priest pushed past Elena into the cottage, followed by the other men. Elena watched helplessly as their eyes scanned her home, noting the bundles of protective herbs, the church records still scattered across her table, and the conspicuous absence of any guest. "Where is he?" "Father," Benedict demanded. "Who?" Elena asked, though she knew the pretense was futile. "The stranger you sheltered 2 nights past. Dr. Meridian tells me you claimed he was resting, then that he had gone to tend his horse. Yet my investigation this morning revealed no horse in your stable, no tracks leading to or from your cottage, and no evidence that any guest has stayed here recently." Elena's mind scrambled for explanations, but Dr. Meridian's clinical observations had trapped her in contradictions she couldn't resolve. "Perhaps I was mistaken about Elena." Father Benedict's voice softened with genuine concern. "You are not in trouble, child, but we believe you may have encountered something dangerous, something that has influenced your memory or your judgment. These creatures have powers beyond mortal understanding." The irony was almost too much to bear. Here stood 4 men trying to protect her from the very being she had chosen to help, while the real danger approached, from creatures none of them were equipped to face. "There is no stranger," Elena said quietly. "I have been alone these past days, researching herbal remedies in the church records. Perhaps the isolation has affected my thinking." Giorgio studied the protective herb bundles with a blacksmith's eye for detail. "These preparations, they're not for healing, are they? Wolfsbane, mountain ash, blessed thistle, these are the herbs my grandmother used to ward off evil spirits." Elena's heart sank. She had underestimated how much folklore survived in the village, how many residents still remembered the old protections their ancestors had relied upon. Father Benedict moved to examine the herbs more closely, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Elena, these preparations suggest knowledge of supernatural threats, knowledge that few possess without good reason." He fixed her with a stare that seemed to pierce straight through her soul. "What aren't you telling us?" Elena looked. At each face in turn, Father Benedict's determined compassion. Doctor, Meridian's clinical concern, Giorgio's practical worry, the fearful confusion of the 4th elder, whose name she had forgotten in her panic. These were good men, trying to protect their community from dangers they barely understood. They deserved honesty, but honesty would expose Varric to destruction and leave the village defenseless against his progeny. "I've been having dreams," Elena said finally, seizing on a half-truth that might satisfy them. "Nightmares about creatures from the old stories. They've left me unsettled, perhaps too eager to prepare protections against imaginary threats. Doctor?" Meridian stepped forward, his medical training evident in the way he studied her appearance. "Dreams can sometimes indicate fever or nervous exhaustion. Have you been eating properly? Sleeping well?" "Well enough," Elena replied, though both were lies. She had barely slept since Varric's arrival, and food had held no appeal, while her mind grappled with supernatural revelations. Father Benedict was not satisfied with her explanation. "Elena, these herb preparations are too sophisticated for someone acting on dream-inspired fear. They follow patterns described in very old texts, knowledge that has been deliberately preserved by—" The priest stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening as understanding dawned. "Your grandmother, Maria Benedetti, was known for her unusual knowledge of protective rituals. The older women in the village whispered that she came from a line of special knowledge." Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. How much did Father Benedict actually know about guardian bloodlines? How long had the Church been aware of supernatural threats in the region? "Special knowledge?" Elena asked carefully. "The kind that marks certain families as guardians against ancient evils. The kind that places a terrible burden on each generation of women who carry the blood." Father Benedict's expression grew deeply concerned. "Elena, if you have inherited your great-grandmother's gift, you may be in more danger than you realize." Giorgio stepped forward, his weathered hands clasped nervously before him. "Father, surely you don't believe the old stories." "I believe in evil that takes many forms," Father Benedict replied firmly. "And I believe in the courage of those called to stand against it. But courage without proper training is merely martyrdom waiting to happen." Elena realized that Father Benedict knew far more about her situation than she had imagined. The priest had been watching her, recognizing signs that marked her as something more than a simple village healer. "The stranger," she said quietly. "What if he wasn't what you think? What if he was seeking help rather than offering harm?" The four men exchanged glances that spoke of conversations Elena had not been privy to. Father Benedict answered with careful precision. "There are legends of such. Beings, creatures cursed against their will, seeking redemption rather than embracing evil. But distinguishing between genuine penitents and clever predators requires knowledge and experience that few possess." His eyes searched her face intently. "Do you believe you have encountered such a being?" Elena felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Truth might bring help, but it might also bring Varric's destruction before he could achieve the redemption he sought. "I believe," Elena said slowly, "that judgment should be reserved for those who understand the full truth of any situation." Father Benedict nodded, as if her answer confirmed his suspicions. "Then you will need these." The priest reached into his robes and withdrew a leather pouch that clinked softly with metallic contents. Elena gasped as he opened it to reveal silver ammunition for firearms, each bullet inscribed with holy symbols. "The Church has prepared for such eventualities," Father Benedict explained. "We have weapons, blessed silver, and knowledge passed down through generations of priests who served as allies to guardian families." "Doctor," Meridian stepped forward, producing a small vial of clear liquid from his medical bag. "Holy water, blessed specifically for use against supernatural threats, more potent than the standard sacramental water." Giorgio reached into his coat and withdrew an object that made Elena's breath catch, an ornate hand mirror with a silver frame, its surface seeming to shimmer with inner light. "This has been in my family for generations," Giorgio said quietly. "My grandmother said it belonged to the Rossis before they died out, and that it should be returned to a guardian when the time was right." Elena stared at the mirror, one of the three sacred implements they had been seeking. "How long have you known?" "Known what?" Father Benedict asked gently. "Known what I am, what my family has been." Father Benedict's smile was sad and knowing. "Since the morning, you requested the church records, child. Your great-grandmother's journal contains very specific instructions about recognizing and assisting her heir when the time of testing arrived." Elena felt tears prick her eyes as understanding dawned. "You've all been protecting me, as our families have protected yours for generations," Giorgio confirmed. "The guardians have never stood alone, Elena. We simply waited for you to discover your heritage before revealing our part in preserving it." Dr. Meridian moved to the window, scanning the tree line beyond Elena's cottage. "But the threat is real and immediate. 3 dead this morning means whatever evil approaches has already begun hunting. We have, perhaps hours before it discovers the Guardian's location." Elena looked at the weapons and holy items her protectors had brought, then at the bundle of herbs she had prepared. Together, they might be enough to mount a defense, but only if Varek's awakening ritual succeeded in giving her the pawn and knowledge to use them properly. "Tonight," she said quietly. "Everything happens tonight." Father Benedict nodded gravely. "Then we prepare for war, child, and pray that when morning comes, evil will have learned once again why guardian bloodlines have survived for 1,000 years. Elena touched the silver locket at her throat, thinking of the pressed flower within, symbol of love that had survived death itself. Tonight she would either join her ancestors in protecting the innocent or die in the attempt. Either way, the quiet life she had known was ending. The time of choosing had finally arrived. The circle of salt and iron glowed pale silver in the moonlight, its perimeter marked with ancient symbols Elena now understood as if she had drawn them herself. The awakening ritual had torn through her consciousness like lightning, flooding her mind with 5 generations of guardian knowledge in the space of a heartbeat. She could feel her ancestors' presence still, their memories, layering beneath her own thoughts like sediment in a deep well. Varek knelt in the circle's center, the ruby amulet blazing like a coal against his chest, as Elena began the ritual that would either redeem or destroy them both. Around them, the old cemetery lay silent, except for the whisper of wind through bare branches and the distant howling that spoke of hunters on the scent. "They're close," Varek said, his supernatural senses detecting what Elena's newly awakened abilities confirmed. 3 vampires moved through the forest beyond the village, drawn by blood bonds and ancient hunger. His progeny had arrived, and they would not be denied. Elena lifted the ornate silver dagger, its blade singing with power that resonated in her bones. The knowledge flowing through her was vast and terrible centuries of guardian lore that explained not only how to fight supernatural evil, but the profound cost such battles extracted from those who waged them. "The ritual requires 3 elements," Elena said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. "The willing sacrifice of tainted blood, the purifying power of guardian essence, and the joining of 3 sacred implements." She gestured to the hand mirror that Giorgio had brought, now positioned at the circle's eastern edge, where it reflected impossible depths. "We have the dagger and mirror. Without the chalice, the ritual will fail." Varek finished. "I know, but perhaps we can weaken my connection to them enough that you can survive the coming battle." Elena nodded, though her heart ached with the knowledge her ancestors had shared. The partial ritual would indeed weaken Varek's bond to his progeny, but it would also drain much of his supernatural strength. He would face 3 powerful vampires while weakened to near mortality. The howling grew closer, and Elena saw Varek's expression tighten with recognition. "Dmitri leads them. He was my first creation, my most loyal soldier. His strength rivals my own, even without the advantage he'll have tonight." Elena began the invocation, words in the old tongue flowing from her lips as if she had spoken them all her life. The salt and iron circle blazed brighter, creating a barrier that would hold against supernatural intrusion, but only for as long as her concentration remained absolute. Sanguis impurus, spiritus redemptus, lux aeterna. The chant was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, too light and quick to belong to any mortal creature. 3 figures emerged from the tree line, their movements predatory and coordinated. Elena's enhanced vision revealed them clearly, despite the darkness. Once human faces marked by centuries of feeding, eyes that burned with unholy fire, hands that ended in claws designed for killing. "Master," the tallest vampire called, his voice carrying the accent of Eastern European nobility. "You have led us quite a chase, 5 centuries of following your scent across the time. World, always arriving too late to reclaim our rightful place at your side." Varek rose within the circle, his own eyes blazing with power that Elena could feel radiating outward like heat from a forge. "Dmitri, you should have let the bonds fade naturally. I am no longer the prince you once served. You are our maker, our source, our eternal lord," Dmitri replied, circling the salt and iron barrier like a wolf testing a fence. "These mortal games of conscience change nothing. We are yours, as you are ours." The other 2 vampires spread out, flanking their leader with military precision that spoke of their shared history as Varek's soldiers. Elena continued the ritual chant, feeling power build within the circle as supernatural forces gathered to answer her call. "The Guardian protects you poorly," observed the female vampire, her voice honeyed despite the threat it carried. "Katerina remembers the old songs, Master. She knows how this game ends." Elena's newly awakened, knowledge provided, context. Katerina had been transformed during a plague year, her dying children's blood, the price of her vampiric rebirth. The 3rd vampire, silent and watchful, bore the mental scars of madness that sometimes accompanied the transformation process. "You cannot enter the circle," Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of 5 generations of guardians. "Salt, sanctified by saints' tears, iron blessed by martyrs' blood, these barriers have held against your kind since the world was young." Dmitri laughed, the sound like glass breaking in winter air. "Barriers made by mortal hands, broken by immortal will. We have learned much in our centuries of hunting, little guardian. Your ancestors' tricks hold no terror for us." He gestured to his companions, and Elena realized with growing horror that they carried weapons of their own blades that gleamed with dark power, artifacts that spoke of knowledge gained through long study of guardian weaknesses. "Iron and salt hold us only if we choose to honor their protection," Katerina added, producing a vial of liquid that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "But darkness diluted with innocent blood dissolves most sacred protections." Elena felt her concentration waver as understanding struck. They had encountered guardian circles before, learned how to break them through systematic corruption of their components. Her protection was not as absolute as her ancestors' memories had promised. "Continue the ritual," Varek urged, his voice tight with strain as he fought to maintain his position within the circle's heart. "Whatever happens, you must complete what we've begun." Elena resumed her chanting, pouring every ounce of will into the ancient words while watching Dmitri prepare to test their defenses. The ruby amulet blazed brighter with each syllable, its power building toward the crescendo that would either save them both or damn them to destruction. The vampire's first assault came without warning, a handful of the corrupted liquid thrown against the circle's western edge. Where it struck, the salt began to smoke and blacken, creating gaps in their protection that widened with each passing second. Elena's chant rose to a crescendo as the barrier began to fail around them. The phoenix feather blazed to life within the ruby amulet like a star being born, its golden light piercing the cemetery darkness as Elena's blood touched the sacred gem. She had cut her palm with the silver dagger, letting her guardian essence flow into the ritual's culmination just as the protective circle finally collapsed under Dimitri's assault. "Now!" Varric shouted, throwing himself between Elena and the attacking vampires as supernatural fire began to consume his vampiric nature. "Complete the transformation!" Elena pressed her bleeding hand against the amulet, feeling the phoenix feather's power surge through her veins like liquid sunlight. The ancient magic recognized her. Guardian blood. Accepting her sacrifice as the catalyst needed to purify, rather than simply transfer the curse that had bound Varric for 5 centuries. Dimitri's claws raked across Varric's chest, opening wounds that should have healed instantly, but instead bled mortal red. The weakening had begun each second of the purification ritual, stripped away more of Varric's supernatural strength, while the phoenix feather worked its transformative magic. "Master, what are you allowing her to do?" Katerina shrieked, her voice high with panic as she sensed the bonds that connected her to Varric beginning to fray. "Stop this madness before we are all destroyed." Elena continued, pouring her life force into the amulet, watching in wonder as the phoenix feather expanded its golden radiance beyond the ruby's confines. The mythical bird's essence had waited centuries for this moment, a willing sacrifice offered not in despair but in love, not to create death but to enable rebirth. The third, vampire, driven beyond reason by the dissolution of bonds he had never understood, launched himself at Elena with mindless fury. She met his attack with the silver dagger, the blessed blade passing through his neck with supernatural ease. Ancient knowledge guided her movements as she fought not the brutal techniques of warfare, but the precise applications of power that her guardian ancestors had perfected over generations. "The bonds are breaking," Dimitri roared, his elegant features contorting with rage and fear. 500 years of service, of loyalty, of shared blood. You cannot simply cut us free." "I am not cutting you free," Varric replied, his voice growing weaker as mortality reclaimed him. "I am setting you free. The choice of what to do with that freedom is yours." Elena watched in amazement as the phoenix feather's light began to wash over the surviving vampires, offering them the same transformation that was changing Varric. The feather's power was not limited to single redemption. It could purify any willing soul that accepted its gift. Katerina fell to her knees as the golden radiance touched her, centuries of accumulated pain and hunger washing away like ice in spring sunlight. "I remember," she whispered, tears of blood streaming down her pale cheeks. "I remember what it felt like to love without consuming, to protect without destroying." But Dimitri rejected the offered redemption with violent fury. "I will not be made weak. I will not surrender the power we have earned through centuries of survival." He lunged at Elena with desperate savagery, determined to destroy the source of transformation before it could claim him. Elena met his charge with movements that seemed to flow like water, the silver dagger tracing patterns in the air that left trails of sacred fire. Her guardian training had awakened not just knowledge, but physical abilities that transcended normal human limitations. She was faster than Dimitri expected, stronger than her mortal frame should have allowed, guided by instincts honed through generations of supernatural combat. The dagger found its mark, piercing Dimitri's heart with such force that the blessed silver emerged from his back in a spray of luminous sparks. He stared down at the blade in disbelief, then at Elena's face, which showed not triumph but profound sadness. "Even now," Elena said softly, "the phoenix feather offers redemption. You need only accept it willingly." For a moment, Elena saw something flicker in Dimitri's eyes, perhaps regret, perhaps longing for the humanity he had abandoned so long ago. But pride and centuries of embracing darkness proved stronger than hope. He pulled himself free of the dagger and staggered backward, choosing dissolution over transformation. Then, "Let my death be the price of my loyalty," Dmitri said, his form already beginning to crumble as the blessed silver worked its final magic. "I served my prince as he commanded, and I die as he would, have wished unredeemed but unbroken." The ancient vampire dissolved into ash that the cemetery wind scattered among the graves, carrying his essence back to the earth that had birthed him centuries earlier. Elena turned to find Varek kneeling beside Katerina, who was undergoing her own transformation. The golden light of the phoenix feather had restored her humanity, while leaving her with just enough supernatural awareness to hunt the remaining unredeemed vampires of Varek's line. "The burden passes to me now," Katerina said, understanding flowing through her, along with renewed mortality. "I will find the others, offer them the choice we have been given, redemption or final rest, but no more feeding on innocence." Varek nodded, his own transformation nearly complete. Elena watched in wonder as color returned to his pale skin, as breath filled lungs that had been still for centuries, as the grey of his eyes warmed to something approaching blue. "Is it finished?" Elena asked, feeling the phoenix feather's power finally begin to ebb. Varek smiled, the first truly joyful expression she had ever seen from him. "It is finished. The curse is broken, the bonds dissolved. I am mortal once more, free to live whatever years remain to me without the burden of endless hunger." Elena helped him to his feet, both of them swaying with exhaustion as the ritual's demands finally took their toll. Around them, the cemetery lay peaceful once more, its ancient graves keeping silent witness to the transformation they had achieved. The phoenix feather's light faded to ember glow within the ruby amulet, its work complete, but its essence preserved should future need arise. Elena tucked the precious gem into her dress, knowing it would remain a reminder of what love could accomplish when offered freely, without reservation or expectation of reward. Spring arrived early that year, as if the land itself celebrated the lifting of ancient darkness. Elena knelt in her expanded herb garden, her hands deep in rich soil that seemed more fertile than it had ever been. Beside her, Varek worked with the patient deliberation of someone learning to appreciate mortality's limited time, his once pale hands now bronzed by honest sunlight. "The wolfsbane is thriving," Elena observed, watching new shoots emerge with unusual vigor. "My grandmother always said it responded to the presence of guardian blood, but I think it also recognizes the absence of supernatural threat." Varek paused in his planting, considering the symbolic significance of their work. Where once they had prepared herbs for protection against evil, now they cultivated healing plants that would serve the village's simple, natural needs. "Strange to think that something meant to ward against creatures like myself now grows stronger because I am no longer what I was." Elena smiled, noting how easily such observations came to him now. The philosophical perspective that had marked 5 centuries of immortal existence remained, but it was tempered by mortality's precious urgency. Every sunset held meaning because there would be a finite number of them. Every shared meal was savored because hunger was temporary and satisfaction achievable. "Dr. Meridian says you're his most interesting patient," Elena said, settling back on her heels to admire their morning's work. A man apparently in his 30s, whose medical knowledge rivals a physician trained in 3 different countries. "I had considerable time to study healing arts," Varek replied wryly. "When you've spent centuries watching people die from ailments you couldn't cure, you tend to pay attention to those who could." The cottage behind them showed signs of recent expansion, a new room built to accommodate Varek's presence, furnished with simple but sturdy pieces crafted by Giorgio's smithy. The village had accepted their marriage with the practical resignation of people who had learned not to question good fortune. Elena's happiness was evident to all who knew her, and Varek's obvious devotion to her well-being had won over even the most suspicious residents. "A letter came this morning," Elena said, producing an envelope from her apron pocket. "From Katerina. She's in Prague now, following leads on 3 vampires who may be among those seeking redemption. Varek took the letter with hands that still trembled slightly when reminded of his supernatural past. Reading Katerina's reports had become both comfort and torment. Comfort because it proved their ritual had worked beyond their highest hopes, torment because each successful redemption reminded him of the decades of suffering his original choices had set in motion. Two accepted transformation willingly, Elena read aloud. The third chose final dissolution rather than continued existence. She says the phoenix feather's power seems to grow stronger with each use, as if redemption feeds upon itself. As it should, Varek said quietly. Goodness multiplies when shared freely. Perhaps that was always the true purpose of the curse, not to create monsters, but to eventually create enough redemption to transform the very nature of darkness. Elena folded the letter carefully, adding it to the growing collection they kept in a cedar box beside their bed. Katerina wrote monthly now, documenting her travels and the slowly diminishing population of vampires who carried Varek's blood. Some welcomed the chance for redemption, others fought it with desperate violence, but none remained unchanged by the encounter. She mentions something else, Elena said, her voice growing thoughtful. Strange dreams, visions of other guardian bloodlines awakening across Europe, as if our rituals somehow sent ripples through whatever connects those charged with protecting humanity from supernatural threats. Varek's expression grew serious as he considered the implications. Guardian lines that had been dormant for generations, suddenly discovering their heritage? It would make sense. If the phoenix feather's power truly feeds upon itself, then perhaps our success has strengthened the entire network of protections. Elena touched the silver locket at her throat, thinking of the pressed flower within that had somehow survived her supernatural awakening completely intact. My grandmother's journal mentioned communication between guardian families in earlier centuries. Perhaps those connections are being restored. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, hands moving with practiced coordination as they tended plants that would serve healing rather than protection. The rhythm of shared labor had become one of Elena's greatest joys. Simple tasks made meaningful by partnership, ordinary moments transformed by the presence of someone who understood both sacrifice and redemption. I dreamed of Marco again last night, Elena said eventually, her voice holding peace rather than pain. He was standing in sunlight, smiling the way he used to when he watched me working in this garden. When I tried to speak, to explain about you and what we've built together, he simply nodded and faded, as if he approved. Varek's hand found hers in the warm soil, their fingers intertwining with unconscious ease. Love doesn't diminish when it's shared with another. Your husband understood that what you feel for me doesn't lessen what you felt for him. Elena squeezed his hand, marveling at its warmth, its steady pulse that reminded her constantly of the miracle of his restored humanity. Sometimes I wonder if this is what my guardian heritage was always meant to accomplish, not just destroying evil, but transforming it into something that could love and be loved in return. Perhaps all our pain served a purpose we couldn't see at the time, Varek agreed. Your loss, teaching you to recognize profound loneliness. My curse, showing me the true value of human connection. We needed to be broken in precisely the ways we were to become the people capable of saving each other. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of children's laughter drifted from the village square where school had just dismissed for the day. Elena listened to those bright voices with the contentment of someone who had helped bring many of those children safely into the world, who had tended their childhood illnesses and watched them grow into young adults ready to create the next generation. No more monsters stalking the mountain roads, Elena observed. No more mysterious disappearances or unexplained deaths. Just the ordinary struggles and joys that mark a normal human community. And two people who found love in the most unlikely circumstances, Varek added, his voice warm with wonder that had not diminished despite months of shared contentment. Who would have imagined that a vampire seeking death and a widow hiding from life could create something so perfectly, peacefully alive? Elena rose and brushed soil from her hands, looking out over the herb garden that had become a symbol of their transformed existence. Where once protective plants had grown in preparation for supernatural battle, now healing herbs flourished in anticipation of natural service to their community. "Come," she said, extending her hand to help Varric to his feet. "Dr. Meridian is bringing his granddaughter by this afternoon, her first pregnancy, and she's nervous about the birthing process. Time for us to focus on bringing new life into the world rather than dwelling on the darkness we've left behind." Varric smiled and took her hand, allowing her to pull him upright with the slight clumsiness that marked his still-adjusting mortality. Together, they walked toward the cottage, where a new chapter of their lives awaited, not as guardian and redeemed vampire, but simply as husband and wife, ready to serve their community through the gentle arts of healing and love. Behind them, the herb garden continued its quiet growth under spring sunlight, tended by two souls who had learned that redemption was not an ending, but a beginning,